well-ventilated room. Back then, they believed that all diseases pretty well were due to bad air, not water that was contaminated, not bugs. They actually called one disease malaria because it was associated where there were sort of smelly, boggy areas. They didn't think it was mosquitoes at all, it was malaria, it was bad air. Anyway, so we got a lovely surgery and cabin up on the first class, promenade deck, best part of the ship, clean, light and airy. So, in fact, as a surgeon, you actually, his talents weren't completely wasted. We've got loads of passenger diaries, and they're full of little stories and accounts of things that happened. So, just to give you an example. Mr. Dearlove writes, another accident. One of the storemen chopped off his middle finger from the first joint opening a tin of herrings. Well, actually, that's self-surgery, isn't it? But you'd still have to go to the doctor to get it fixed. How does somebody chop their finger off opening a tin of herrings? Well, you've seen the tins in our pantry next to the galley. They're big tins, lovely big commercial tins of things like herrings. We haven't invented tin openers yet. The lid is sealed with lead. And to open it, you get your trusty knife out and you stab it and lever it up. That's what happens if you haven't got a tin opener, actually. But there we go. Life's better now. So, much safer. Now, that was a crew member, and the doctor was obviously going to look after him. Passengers have accidents as well. This is one of the passengers. He was a steerage passenger. Right. Mr. Savington, at breakfast I was splitting some biscuit when the knife slipped and inflicted a deep wound. I went to Dr. Ziegler to have it bound up. Crikey, how can you cut your hand open splitting a biscuit? I'll show you. Right. Here's one I split earlier, so make sure there are no accidents. It's a ship's biscuit. It would be twice that size, so I've split it. They are rock hard. You'd break your teeth if you tried to eat it. You certainly couldn't just crumble it like a hobnob. You stabbed it with your trusty knife, and that's when it hangs. So that's how he cut his hand. So there were accidents, and it was quite useful to have a surgeon. The other things that happened on board, lady passengers gave birth. We had over 40 babies born on this ship on voyages to Australia. There wasn't the sort of midwifery going on then, so people probably didn't know they were expecting. And of course, with a 2-month voyage, you could imagine, oh, it can happen. Well, we know all about these. I've got one here, and it's that lady's diary, Mrs. Henning. She writes, yesterday a fine young boy was born. The child is to be called John Gray, Morland Hocken, Great Britain Magazine. Crikey, why do you name a child like that? Well, John Gray was the captain of the ship, and it's a tradition that for babies born on a ship, named after the captain. Morland Hocken was our ship's surgeon, who delivered him, obviously successfully. Rather nice having children named after you if you're a doctor. Anyway, Great Britain Magazine, the parents of this fine boy actually were responsible for the newsletter that the passengers produced. It was called the Great Britain Magazine. So they've added that on as well. So poor lad got all those notes. So, real birth. So the doctor actually had to be a midwife as well. All specialities. There were no nurses on ships at that time at all. Certainly no midwives. Well, I take tour groups around a lot of schools regularly. And when I get to the end, and I always say, Any questions? And I can be almost certain a little hand will go up, a little voice will say, "Did anybody die on board?" Oh yes, we had a few deaths. Now, this diary note, a medical note, is from Dr. Andrew Alexander. We've got a picture of him here. Dr. Andrew Alexander is right way around. This gentleman here, that is Dr. Andrew Alexander, ship's surgeon, one of the officers. So here's all the ship's officers. The captain is the well-upholstered gentleman, Andrew Alexander, ship's surgeon.
Well, that was.
Right, well he kept a diary and he kept medical notes. So, he writes, "I'm sorry to have to report the very sudden death of Charles Worksman, aged 6 years, a fall from the upper deck into the engine room." Oh dear. Well, you can imagine, if you walked on that upper deck, you go past the engine room, you can peer in through that skylight. If it's not too windy out there, you might have done that. Obviously, the little lad is going to look in at the engine. Oh, it's exciting. Well, it's safe now because we've got it all closed up. When this ship was sailing, that would have been opened up for ventilation. So it was, you could look straight in. You can imagine, he's leaning over, the ship rolls, whoop, bang. That's it. Poor little Charlie. Never mind. This morning, Mrs. George Shaw Wycherley gave birth to a daughter, and both are doing well. So in one day, Andrew Alexander has had to deal with a fatal accident and delivered a child. Again, successfully. So there we go. Well, Andrew Alexander didn't have a lot of luck, really. He had to write what we call a Dear John letter. You'll see what I mean in a minute. 24th of April. It is my painful duty to inform you that your son William Wheatley, acting as steward to me, was lost, washed overboard on the 9th of April at 10:30 in the morning. So we lost a few people washed overboard. Nothing much for the doctor to do that, but that's his steward gone. So he was familiar with people suffering. Well,
Bye-bye, Dad.
another little bit of history we know about Andrew Alexander is in the museum. When you walked up the ramp in the Dockyard Museum, on the left you've got some displays. One of them is a silver snuff box in one of those cabinets. It's engraved to Dr. Andrew Alexander. Grateful thanks from the engineering crew. Now we haven't got the full research yet done on that, but we suspect that on that particular voyage there must have been an accident with the engineers, perhaps in the engine room, somebody burned, scalded or whatever, and Andrew Alexander has obviously looked after them and they're grateful. He gets a silver snuff box. Such rather nice. Well, back then, if you go into that surgery, you'll see the medicines that he had available. And I say he, they were all he's, of course. We didn't have female doctors at that time until later. So, very limited what they had available then. With no antiseptics, with no antibiotics. We haven't even got aspirin. We've got one wonder drug though, laudanum. Now laudanum is the old name for opium. Marvellous stuff. It does everything. It was used widely. In fact, if you look in Mrs. Beaton's Book of Home Management, you'll find a recipe for poppy syrup. Syrup of poppy. What does it contain? Opium from poppies. So, it was good for helping you sleep, if you couldn't sleep on board the ship. Very good. If you had an upset stomach, it was very good for that. because if you've got